Everyone, and welcome to another exciting Flash Forum. Today we have Deva, who joins us from Indianapolis in the States, and today we're going to have a chat around maintaining profitable growth and sustainability into the future, what key account managers should be helping clients with now to remain top of mind. Hi Deva, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much, Nishant, and for everybody else out there who's tuned in for this session.
Excellent. Before we start, I'll just go through some admin. So if you have a question, please can you post that question in the Q&A field? You'll see it at the bottom on your taskbar. So if you have a question, please just post it there. You'll also have the ability to like or uprate questions. So as opposed to repeating a question that you see, if it has to do with what you're trying to ask, please just upvote the question and we'll address it and prioritize it. And what we'd also like to do is, if you'd like to ask the question live, please raise your hand. So post the question as well as raise your hand, and we'll invite you to ask the question live if you so choose to do. Deva, you know, the range of experience, because we want the session to be interactive, and you've got a range of experience globally in this area. What's the current changes you see? You know, we're in disruptive times. I think everyone's hearing about disruptive times. But what are the current changes you're seeing in this particular topic globally?
Indeed. And I think, thank you so much, Nishin, for this wonderful question, because I think what I'm saying, again, the fact is that usually in this time of the year is when I usually travel to different parts of the world to give lectures in different parts of the world on some of the same topics as well. And of course, we've not been asked to travel. We cannot travel these days. So essentially what I've resorted to is mostly talking to people that I know from many of these regions that we're talking about in terms of what is happening. And as a matter of fact, I was on the phone day before yesterday, actually, with a couple of people from your part of the world, mostly in Africa. And they were talking about what is happening in terms of the business kind of climate out there and how it's affecting the sales function. And what was amazing was that when I was talking to them, more or less I heard the same thing happening everywhere around the world. More or less the topics echoed all the things out there. So essentially what is happening out there is, I'm going to limit myself to the domain of sales and customers, because there's a lot of things happening out there that I don't think I'm qualified to talk about. But what we're seeing happening a lot is this feeling of uncertainty. And what was amazing was this uncertainty that we're talking about is as much in the minds of the salespeople. Now, when I talk about key account managers, I'm going to, of course, they are a separate breed of people, but I'm going to put them together as salespeople overall, is there's this feeling of uncertainty. But uncertainty arises due to many reasons. One is, of course, this uncertainty is driven by uncertainty with your customers. So essentially what's happening in my customer's business, because what is happening in my customer's business is going to affect me and my ability to sell or create value. Now, if I'm not able to do that, now I'm not going to be able to meet what is required from me from my organization. So there's uncertainty that's got to do with that, but it's driven by what's happening with uncertainty with my customers, with what happens with me, uncertainty with what's happening within my organization and how my boss is going to be looking at me. Then of course, there's going to be uncertainty that's got to do with when is this going to end. And this is putting a lot of anxiety and stress about how it's going to affect my personal life as well. So you have these kind of things happening, and essentially what makes it even more challenging for salespeople and key account managers. And this is something that is echoed everywhere, not just from my talk to the people in South Africa, but also when I talk to people in Europe, when I talk to some of the partners that we work with at our university here in the United States, is that they're very, very concerned, but at the same time, they realize that they should not show to their customers is, how do I take care of my customers? And how do I also make sure that I take care of my own organization? Because it's, you know, there's a famous saying that charity begins at home. So we need to take care of our own organization first, and we need to make sure that we keep our customers happy. And so this is what is really keeping them up at night. And of course, what we also hear is that how are the firms? So essentially, this is as much an indication of what's happening with salespeople as it is with what sales organizations are doing to help their salespeople deal with these difficult times. And if you don't mind, I'll just say something about what is the consensus that I'm hearing about what they should be doing about it. And then we could go into a little bit more detail as well. But the consensus I'm hearing about this is that this is the time for making sure that you ensure to your customers about continuity, especially for key accounts, because the term key accounts has got to do with those customers who also might regard you as a key supplier. So what your customers want to know is that during these difficult times, will you be helping them meet with their challenges? Will you be together with them? And the challenges could be many things, right? It could go all the way from how are we going to co-create as against I'm having financial difficulty. So how can I make sure that I can offer continuity to my customers, but do this in a very empathetic manner? So essentially continuity, showing empathy, sometimes showing transparency, that is not sugarcoating things. Essentially, now more than ever, I need to be transparent with my customers. So for example, if there are situations where you need the customers to pay right now, you don't need to sugarcoat it. You need to tell them why the customer needs to pay right now, because that is going to be important for continuity as well. So essentially, this is what is happening in terms of how I need to take care of my customers. And also, this is the time for me to really choose which customers are truly the customers that we want moving forward. And this, by the way, is consensus across the world, at least the world that I interact with.
Okay, and Deva, I mean, this principle of key accounts is an important one, because different organizations think they prioritize key accounts in different ways. And so should we be identifying different key accounts based on the disruption that's happening now? So should sales organizations be reclassifying their key accounts in this context, or simply prioritizing who they thought were their key accounts and the initiatives you mentioned, applying that?
I think that's an excellent question. And one of the first things that we are talking to when we talk to sales managers. Why do I say sales managers? Because a lot of times a key account manager is usually given an account and said, this is your key account. So the decision to say, how do we try and take a look at key accounts, to a large extent depends upon sales management in terms of saying, how do we classify our accounts? This does not mean that the key account manager does not have a role, that he or she does not have a role in choosing that. They do have a role, especially now, to make sure that the decisions that were made to identify those key accounts, do they still hold given the current circumstances? And I think this is the time where you can actually start really asking yourself is, remember we had 10 key accounts, but are they really our key accounts, yes or no, right? Are these customers, because it's a kind of a relationship. I usually say, when I talk about it to this day, people always ask me, do I have sales experience myself? Have I been a key account myself? And for those of you who are in long-term committed relationships, you know that that is your biggest key account. The biggest sale that you ever made was to your significant other. And being in a long-term relationship is also kind of almost like a marriage or a long-term live-in relationship or whatever it is. And when that is the case, you can never become complacent because things always change. And actually, it's during these times that you can actually start asking yourself is that, yeah, we classified certain accounts as key accounts, not because as a key account manager, I had a choice, but because we decided these were key accounts. But now is the time for us to go back, depending upon the assumptions that we had made, is when we need to start asking ourselves, is there a real difference between a key account as against what we would call named accounts? Yeah, what do we call it? Key accounts, everybody understands. Named accounts, you see what I mean? Or specific accounts, or target accounts, or strategic accounts, different names, you hear that as well. So for me, what usually happens is this is the time for you to go back and reevaluate, not just for now, because I think what COVID has done right now is it's changed the way we're going to work, the way we're working now, and the way we're going to be working in the future. So those kind of customers who are with you during these difficult times and are willing to work together with you should be the ones that you should be actually considering as key accounts. Yes, you are going to have customers who appear as key accounts just because they buy a lot from you. You see what I mean? They get rid of your inventory. Of course, you can also use key accounts because if you sell to them, it's easier for you to get your foot in the door in other customers. Just you want to use these as reference value. But all these kind of descriptions that we give for key accounts, I think need to be rethought. And I think what is going to be extremely critical is the ability to have a conversation with the customer, and the ability for you to have access to different levels within the customer's organization, the ability for you to find key spots. And if you have access to these, then I think that is what you should be looking at as a key account, apart from the other normal things. And at this aspect of, oh, the last one is the amount of strategic fit. So essentially, if you want to be seen as a value player and your customer is in their market where they're seen as a kind of a cost differentiator, that you know that now during these times, that's when it's not going to work, because you want the customer to pay a high kind of price for what you want to bring in, but your cost differentiator customer is looking at how can I sell it at a lower price to my customers. So essentially, that kind of strategic fit becomes all the more important now. So you might want to rethink, you have to rethink who truly are our key customers. And even you want to classify them along different kinds. You might say, this is a key account that I need to get rid of my inventory. This is a key account where I need to work with them because we are going to co-create something that is going to help us be relevant moving forward. So you will have to come up with this. You have to become flexible. And to be perfectly honest, even I have been teaching key account management for the past 7 to 8 years, where I've actually been in South Africa, at least for the past 4 years, teaching this very thing. And I am rethinking, maybe we need to have different kind of key accounts. You might call them key accounts, but you should have a different way of handling them, because you need different key accounts for doing different things for you.
I mean, what you're talking about is essentially, a lot of what you're talking about is capabilities. So, you know, we all know, I mean, some people in this audience, some people would be salespeople that handle key account, key accounts. Some people would be in charge of key account strategies. The question I'm asking is, what sort of, so salespeople often draw on their different skill sets to close. And they're quite flexible in that there. What are some of the capabilities or skill sets that you think that a person, or alternatively, strategically, that you should be looking out for in an organization that would really drive sales currently in the situation we're in?
Indeed, it's an excellent question. I guess a lot of questions you're going to ask are going to be excellent, because it feeds in right into what I'm really passionate about. So essentially, it's great. I think the answer to it goes along different ways, right? So one is, of course, what do you look for as capabilities in a key account manager himself or herself? Because that's one question that's quite different from the capabilities that we need to have to support a key account manager to do his or her job. And then, of course, what do we look for in a customer? So in the previous answer, I talked a little bit more about what we should be looking for in a customer, right? And again, there's a lot more to it than just this, but I'm going to be very concise and given the limited amount of time that we have. So in terms of capabilities of salespeople, and that is something which is very, very critical. Of course, there are certain capabilities you need to display at all times. All times. Empathy. Does not matter if you're going through COVID or not, you should actually be able to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. That's one thing you need to have. I don't know if it's a capability, if it's a skill. I firmly believe that it's not something that you're just born with. You can be trained on it as well. That some people are just born with having the right amount of empathy, but others can be trained on this as well. Second link to empathy is, how do I then emote with my customers on it? So essentially, we talk about emotional intelligence. Do I have that? The third thing, especially for key account managers, which people think that key account management is a lot about sales, but I actually say key account manager is actually a marketing manager with a customer segment of one. Your one customer with whom you need to do your marketing. What do I mean by that? Is that I need to understand what is happening in my customer's industry, what is happening in their environment, what is happening in terms of the threats that my customer is facing. So essentially, anybody familiar with marketing would know the concept of SWOT. Anybody with strategy marketing would know SWOT, right? Strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And I need to be doing this for my customer, because I need to understand what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats my customer is facing. to help me position my firm and my offering to them, right? So again, empathy, emotional intelligence, a marketing skill set. When I'm talking about marketing, I'm talking about marketing strategy. You also need to have kind of an analytical skill set. Again, does not have to be completely analytical. You could get support from your organization for that. But at least this analytical skill set I'm talking about is actually the ability to do research. So for example, being able to read the annual reports of my customers and see what the customer is saying and analyze it and link it back to your SWOT, saying, based on this, how should I change my conversation with my customers on this, right? These are 4 things at least. And the last thing is truly a focus on the customer. Yes, it is empathy. Empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of the customer, but putting yourself in the shoes of the customer should then drive the way you are customer focused. So those are the kind of capabilities that I think, and this is not exhaustive, by the way. Yeah, I mean, if we were there in a normal setting, we had more time, we could actually go back, ping back and forth with the participants as well. Those are the capabilities I need to have. And the last one, which is now becoming more critical in the COVID era, is I need to become a digital specialist. It's really strange, but if I'm used to typically talking to my customers face to face, now my customer I cannot meet them face to face. I might need to understand how do I communicate with my customers. The simplest thing is, instead of face to face, I might have to use Zoom, Skype for business, whatever it is. That's one. I should also think about, hey, that's great, but what if my marketing team is coming up with interesting content that is relevant to my customer, but I cannot set up a meeting with them? So there are tools like account-based marketing. How can I become a digital specialist with the help of my team to actually use and send targeted information to my customers when I cannot even talk to them over Zoom or things like that? You see what I mean? So those are the capabilities from there. I can go on about the capabilities of the organization, but I'm going to stop at this point in time.
But I love what you're saying about empathy, because for me, what empathy relates to is so many different dimensions, but it's the concept of personalization. Because truthfully, the companies are going to be all going through very different things and very different situations. And you mentioned value exchange earlier. And I would imagine for salespeople and key account managers, you're going to have to personalize the value that you're giving based on what your clients are currently going through. And industry, manufacturing is different from automation. It's going to be different from professional services. And I think that's a really important concept. I've got a question, Deva, from Guy Harris, which I see is from Cape Town. And it might have to do, I might be mistaken, but it might have to do with our earlier question around how you decide key accounts. But his question is, do you use contribution per limiting factor to determine which are key accounts?
So that's an interesting point, because the contribution per limiting factor, I think, depends upon what do you mean by contribution, right? Contribution is, are they contributing just to get rid of our inventory, is quite different from contribution to saying, hey, we are going to co-create something with you. So we are going to free up our resources and we're going to have a complete honest conversation and give you an idea about how we're going to work. It's going to be different from the customer might say, I'm just going to co-ideate. What do I mean by that is they're not going to free up their own resources, but they're willing to give you feedback about what is happening. So that contribution, again, contributing factor is going to be different depending upon the kind of industry that you're in. What is your criticality? What is it that you want to take a look at? But I think this is fantastic that what you're talking about is, because these are decisions that a key account manager can influence. But unfortunately, if you work in an organization where the people who decide who are key accounts are, I hate to say the word old school, but if they just believe in terms of the revenues that you make and the operating margins that you make, typically this is what you get, right? And if it's in the manufacturing sector, how much inventory can you get rid of with these people? Some of them may be a little bit more forward thinking and saying, okay, if I'm going to be working with a Pepsi or if I'm going to be working with a Coke, yes, they are going to be a pain in the behind, but it's going to be easier for me to tell other people saying, I do work with Pepsi, I do work with Coke. So essentially, these would be typically the kind of things that you see. But what you're going into is actually the level of strategic fit, which I think is going to become more important after COVID, to help you have these kinds. That's what I said. So you will have key accounts, and you might even want to classify key accounts into key accounts necessary for me to get rid of inventory. You see, that's a contribution. That's my understanding of what you mean by a contribution factor as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Hopefully that is
Gaius said it's essentially what he meant by contribution is the selling price minus the variable cost. And I think we spoke a little bit. I think we spoke about a kind of a matrix structure on identifying key accounts. You know, in a disruptive time, it isn't necessarily about how much money they give you. Potentially, subscription model clients will potentially be more valuable now in terms of regular revenue than it would be the one stuff. So I think there's often different metrics, and it's about finding the balance for your organization.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very interesting point, because what is, I think, happening depending upon the kind of industry that you're in, right? So when you talk about SaaS models, that software as a service kind of models, so this idea of annual recurring revenue, so essentially how much revenues do I want with this customer? The idea is that I want to reduce churn as much as possible, right? So essentially churn being the number of customers who leave. And so what you want to do is that you want to make sure that for all the effort that you put so hard in bringing those customers in, you want to keep churn as low as possible, right? Now, by the way, that's just not for SaaS. The idea makes sense everywhere, right? So you spend a lot of money bringing a customer in and you want to keep them. Again, of course, there are customers you need to let go as well. Again, that's a different topic itself. But the fact is that I need to bring those people in. I need to keep them. The idea of reducing churn is why we're looking at key account management in the first place, right? That is, we want to make sure that not only do we keep them, and that's interesting you talk about this as well, because Nishan, you talked about value exchange. And usually when we teach a class, especially one of the things I talk about is there is value for the customer, and there is what we call value of the customer. Value for the customer is what can I do for the customer? How can I maybe help them reduce their cost or increase their revenues or the chance to make more money or reduce the risk? A combination of these three things also is possible. But what I also should not forget is that I'm not offering a charity. What I'm offering is I'm giving you all these, but in return, I need to make sure that I make money on this. And I think if that is what Guy is saying out there, or Guy, sorry if I mispronounced your name, just like people call me Deva instead of Deva. So essentially, if you take a look at this idea of what the customer, what is the price and what the customers are willing to pay, that becomes very, very interesting, because then if your customer is only focusing on price as against looking at value, again, I'm not talking about COVID now, in general, that is never a key customer to begin with, because they should be bringing something else to the table. Say, for example, the example I gave you of Coke, that you know that these people are going to harangue you for low price all the time, but you know that that is a foot in the door because it's going to make it easier for me to get other business. That's the only place where you can accept a lower price, because technically a key account is where you should be doing a lot more than just focus on price. And that is what you will see, is that a lot of times the way you define your key accounts is, if you just take a look at revenue and operating margins and stuff like that, your key accounts are not usually the most profitable in terms of contribution margin according to that, but they can give you other benefits that are not necessarily easily quantifiable. That's what I meant earlier. So it's a great question. This is something that we discuss a lot, but I have worked with many industrial manufacturers where the concept of sales and sales management for them is, it is easy. If we have good enough products, our products will sell by themselves. The job of the salesperson is not to mess up all the good work that product marketing, and R&D has come up with. So your job is to just go take orders. So essentially, when you have that, if you have that kind of mentality, then you're not going to put a lot of thought into how we define a true key account. But hopefully, COVID is going to shape all that, where suddenly you're going to have customers who you thought were a pain in the behind were actually great customers to work with.
Yeah.
And customers. That's pretty much what's going to happen. Hopefully that answers your question as well.
So let's talk a little bit about, so we talked about the current, we know we're in a crisis, but let's talk a little bit about the future. So we all know, I mean, globally, industries will be different, companies will be different, behaviors will be different. What do companies right now, so primarily sales organizations, what do they do right now to prepare for an engagement with a future customer? Is it
Yeah.
embedding in certain communication technologies, e-retailing, if you're not already there? What are some of the things that they need to pivot in order to address a future customer?
Let me begin by the fact that we have to be very careful about what is going to happen once things go back to COVID. Let's not forget that you think that again, you think that we need to be changing a lot because of COVID. Our customer now has been forced to work along the same technology line. So essentially, this is a great time for us to push through technology, especially in customer-facing roles. Now, I'm not talking about how do I automate my process internally, because that is already has been going on. That will continue to go on. I think COVID is more a catalyst that is going to make a lot of things changes, which is now going to be, okay, now I know why we're doing this. Now, don't forget that the customer is also used to a particular way of working. I'm talking about B2B. I'm not talking about B2C. We can also talk about B2C when you talk about retailing, especially. Retailing as in retailing towards the end customer. That's quite different from a company that says, I want to retail and do all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to see, in my opinion, is that when things go back to what, quote unquote, what is normal, is that you're not going to initially see a drastic change in the way. In fact, customers are going to go back to what they were most comfortable with. This is what I think is going to happen. Yes, they are going to look at technologies to the way they communicate with you and everything else, but they're still going to say if it's going to be $1 million deal or multi-million rand deal, then they would still say, I need to see you face to face. You see what I mean? So essentially, there are certain things that are going to go back. Take, for example, in a B2C case, I don't know if you've paid attention, but in Guangzhou, in China, apparently, when they started to ease restrictions, I believe that in one day, the Hermes, the luxury retailer, luxury fashion. So as you can tell that I'm not much into fashion, I do not know, even find the words to explain this. Hermes apparently made close to a couple of million dollars of business in a day in one of their stores. It was what they call revenge buying. That is, hey, you kept me cooped up for so long, and now I'm going to actually go out and binge, right? So suddenly that's what's going to happen. Now, what you're going to see is that when this goes out, for some time, change is always hard. Change is all, thank you for that. So change is always hard. I think, Sogran, I just want to say a shout out to you because you are putting in the relevant content for the people to see at all times. So that was inspired to put the CNBC report out there. So customers, we are human beings and we hate change. Not all of us embrace change. And if you say, no, I'm a person who loves change, it's very, very dependent upon what you're passionate about. So overall, people do not like change. People are what we call cognitive misers. So you're going to have a certain amount of customers going back. So I don't think you should overreact and say we need to go everything digital, because if your customer is not ready for it, if you think you're going to go digital, you're going to do all these new concepts, sales enablement kind of stuff, account-based marketing, and the customer says, no, I want you in. Come visit me again, right? And when that happens, you cannot go there with your digital brochures. They're going to say, it's okay, but can you print it out for me? I'm not kidding. I've heard this as well. So that's one thing. But one thing that you can really make sure that's going to change is that this is going to put certain things in perspective in terms of understanding that your customer, the traditional way of doing business is going to change. The people that you thought would never change now have got an idea that their organization is going to change. So you might want to even help them transition through the process. The key is empathy, not just for your organization, is to help the people on the other side of how am I going to do this. That's something you need to build within your organization. That's number one. The second thing that's going to happen is that longer deals, the deals, if you're looking at big deals, they are going to take more time because of the fact that people are going to become risk averse. They're going to start asking themselves, is this really something that we want? Can we put this off a long time? I'm actually talking to a couple of finance professors, because for key account managers, if you think you should not know the basics of finance, please think again. Now more than ever, you should understand the financing model of your customers. I know some customers right now when I talk to my colleagues in finance, where they're actually saying with difficulty in finding access to capital moving forward, you're going to have those kind of customers who might even think about looking at ways by which They might change their whole business model to move from more, if it's CapEx, if they're looking at capital expenditure buying, they might want to move into more OpEx, which goes into what Nishan was saying about the SaaS kind of model, subscription-based services. So you could have customers moving towards that, which means that we should ask ourselves is, are we as a firm ready for that? So if my customer is going to change their business model, are we ready for it? So you see what I mean? So essentially, great. And you see all those kind of things. I love this idea of public offering. If my customer is going to go for IPO, or if my customer is going to say, you know what, we are not going to be paying dividends to our shareholders, that is going to have an impact on why they're doing it, because they want to keep cash flow in-house. So which means that they might be having difficulties in finding cash. So which means that how can we help them out? You see what I mean? So essentially, depending upon what is happening, I need to change that. But that comes with two things that account managers need. How am I going to support my account manager? So if we need to move towards this digital transformation, is how do I support them through this? You're going to see more and more marketing beginning to play an important role. Why do I say marketing? In business to business contacts, and for every person who's tuned in right now working in business to business contacts, tell me if I'm wrong when I say what is the role of marketing, and you hear things like marketing is a black hole, money goes in, nothing comes out, marketing spends all the money that we work so hard to bring in. Those kind of days are gone, because you're going to have more and more help from marketing in customizing content that is relevant for your sales, for your salespeople to their customers. But the biggest change which is going to happen is with my sales managers and management and higher levels, is if my customer is putting off making decisions longer. If the customer is going to say, I remember the 2008 and 10 financial crisis, where we went from just one or two people signing off on big deals, where I saw the idea of the 4 eyes concept. So if two people, if one person could sign a deal, now they said we need to have 2 pairs of eyes on it. Now you've actually seen Gartner come in and say, hey, there are close to 6.8 people involved in a complex decision-making process. That is only going to go up. Longer sales cycle, which means that my sales organization now has to be ready to take a look at how am I going to be evaluating, setting KPIs, key performance indicators for my salespeople along the way. How do I support them? How do I coach them? And these are the kind of things that every organization I'm talking to is talking about it. But for now, for the time being, all those kind of things have to be kind of put in abeyance. What we need to do is that we need to tell our salespeople that we are backing them. And we need to tell our salespeople to tell that we are going to reduce as much risk as possible for our customers, and we'll make sure that we will be there to help our customers through these difficult times. Now is not the time to try and go in for the sale. Now is the time to use empathy, and if the customer has a need, you should not be afraid to ask for the sale if the customer can afford it as well.
I love this idea of helping the customer along a journey to be able to interact with you. There's this cycle, because you might be changing your business and creating new ways to do business, but helping your customers get to a point where they can interact with you at that level. So even when you re-engage with them, you're doing it in a cost-effective way, because they're now completely acclimatized to the new way that you're working, or new business models you've created. So I love this idea of kind of becoming an advisor. So as opposed to a salesperson, advising your customer. So it's a really cool concept that you brought through. I've got a question from Cohen, and he's asked, is there a specific model to determine the best mix between value and price? Customers almost always push for lower prices, and especially when they're struggling, lower prices. At what point should price be sacrificed for value? And I think I'll build on Cohen is, once we come out of the crisis, if you've sacrificed price for value, how then do you reclaim that price back once the world can pay for it? So
Indeed. So Nishan, I really want you to come back in case I don't answer the second part of the question first, because this is going to be a long-winded answer. I just want to check, how are we on time?
We're good. We've got about say 8 to 10 minutes.
Great. So essentially, Covid, thank you for this question, which again goes back. It is linked to what Guy was asking before about the contribution, because so when we teach a class, now this is not because of COVID. So when I begin teaching a class, both for my younger undergrads as well as when I come in and when I typically teach at the key account class at GIBS, or any other plan where I talk about key accounts, I begin by saying, does not matter if it's key accounts or not. There is this value equation you need to keep in mind, which is value is benefits divided by price, right? Value is what benefits can I deliver to my customer, and what is the customer going to pay for in exchange for the benefits that they're going to get, right? Now, what is going to happen is that in the past, those benefits that we had before COVID, you knew what benefits we needed to provide. Either are we going to help the customer make more money, or are we going to help reduce the cost for the customer, or if you're in, say, in certain sectors, how can I make sure that I can guarantee risk reduction for the customers? Those are the typical kind of benefits. How it parlays, we can always talk about this afterwards, but typically those are the kind of benefits the customer wants. Now, when I'm creating value for the customer in terms of those benefits, what you should always keep in the back of your mind within your own organization is that I am creating value for the customer, but I'm actually spending money. My cost to serve goes up the more benefits I provide, because I need to come up with the right kind of products. I need to come up with the right kind of services. I need to come up with the right kind of skill sets necessary. I need to pay my salespeople to go and create that value for the customer, right? So every benefit that I deliver has a cost to serve. And that usually is captured in the price that we set. So what's going to happen is that if you are not careful about doing that balance and being able to communicate it, what's going to happen is, under normal circumstances, if the price that you charge is not making up for the benefits, you're going to be at a loss. Now, the question is, in key accounts, in many key account cases, you will see that the benefits that the customer gets sometimes might be much more than the price you're charging. But you can always make an argument, not as a key account manager, but as a sales organization, saying that, but I'm getting much more from that customer. For example, if I have a key account who's buying a lot, I can make sure that my supply chain is as lean as possible, so that I can work with my distributors and reduce my cost of goods sold and make sure that I'm making profits there. I can work with that customer to co-create ideas that will help me get better leverage in my market. So I can try with that justification. Now, when you cannot justify that, saying that this customer is just a pain, I cannot get anything out of this. Now, during COVID, you still have to take care of these customers, because if you don't do it, and if they take to social media and air their grievances, other people are going to catch on to it and saying you're not necessarily helping your customers during difficult times. That's the empathy factor, right? As an organization. But if you do have to make changes to your pricing during these difficult times, usually it's not directly pricing. It could be things like, can I pay, instead of normal payment of 60 days, I can give you a payment in 90 days, 120 days, hopefully not 365 days, because we saw that happening during the 2008 crisis, where you went from 60 days to 365 days. But when that happens, if you are going to be lowering your price, do understand that, as was pointed out, that you have to come up with a clear communication that, one, that lower price is only for a fixed time, but you are doing this because it's at a loss for you. Because if you don't communicate it, and I believe it was in 2018 when I was at GIBS, where I actually had the exact same question asked by one of the participants in a key account program, where this person said, we had a problem because we reduced the price because the customer was going through some difficult times, but we didn't accompany that with a kind of good communication. So what the customer did after the situation resolved, they said, wait a minute, if you could give me this lower price now, you could have always given me this lower price for the past 5 years when I paid a lot more for the same product. So what they said, the next time you send me an invoice, I am going to deduct that extra what we paid for the past 5 years from this new invoice, because you have overcharged me for the past 5 years. So if anything at all is this COVID, if you are going to consider doing it, I would rather you try and provide the customer with more benefits and still keep the price as much as possible so that they get more value, right? Because the price, when you can always say that this is very due to COVID, we're giving you this extended thing, but as much as possible, try not to give any kind of price concessions, because that is going to come to bite you in the behind afterwards. If you are, and if you have to do that, at least tell them that this is only for COVID. and you are taking a hit on this, because that's what it is. But this is how much we believe in you, dear customer. It comes into how we communicate with the customers. Hopefully that answers your question. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think to close off, I mean, I think one of the questions is, so in June we've got an online key account management program at GIBS, and you'll be doing that program. But in the context where guys are just struggling to make kind of sales, can you in one sentence say why it's so important that this concept of lifelong learning, this concept of learning new skills when we're in disruption, in one sentence, why would it be, should it be crucial for somebody to upskill themselves, whether it be the GIBS course or whether it be another program, wherever they choose to go?
And the first and foremost is that you need to future-proof yourself. The answer is as simple as that. If you want a simple one, you need to future-proof yourself. Technology is changing the way we're working on a day-to-day basis. And you need to understand how your job is likely to change moving forward based on how the customer is going to change, and you need to be prepared for it. And I think that if you've done everything possible in your domain, learn from other domains. Essentially what it is that when you learn from other domains, you will actually be in a much better position to understand why your customers are doing certain things and why your own organization is doing certain things when you understand other kind of things happening and other things. So I'll be a classical example. I graduated with a degree in engineering. I was not necessarily trained on sales, but I had to learn quickly about sales so that I would be relevant to it. Then what is happening right now is that once I'm going into sales and teaching key account management, suddenly you realize that, wait a minute, there are these new digital tools like account-based marketing, marketing automation, sales enablement, which is not what I grew up with. Now suddenly I have to learn to do this because that is my profession. Because if I'm not talking about it, my customers are going to say, I'm going to go somewhere else. Same thing applies to you as well. Right? And the third most important thing is that you should stay relevant within your own organization. Because if you're not able to create value, if you're not there to be flexible with what's happening right now and be there when your companies are going through this, then you are going to be made redundant because you're not necessarily bringing value at the time when a company needs you to be creating value. Be flexible, be forward thinking, and be there to kind of channel the kind of champion this change because you are ready for it yourself. So lifelong learning for me is definitely a must because your business models are changing at a rapid pace just because of technology is evolving at that pace.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deva. And thank you to each and every one of you that have joined today's Flash Forum. We hope that, as usual, you have received the benefit that you are looking to receive. And please don't forget to register for tomorrow's Flash Forum and hopefully see you there. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deva.
Thank you all for signing up. Thanks.